Thank you. All right. So just a quick recap of what we learned on Saturday. It was on S3. So we learned about how the bucket permissions, bucket policies work, correct? It's where while IAM policies help you to assign a certain set of privileges to a user principal, a bucket policy actually helps you to define, what are the granular privileges that a bucket needs to have, right? So that's at a bucket level. So that is where bucket policies, again, it's very similar to the IAM language. We use a very similar IAM language even in the bucket policies. And we say that what are the actions that are possible by a certain principle on a specific bucket, right? So this way you can granularly control the access of the bucket. I also gave a few examples of how S3 buckets are used in real world applications for static website hosting, for storing images, for storing documents, right? So for processing, data processing, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's move on. So today what we're going to start with is CloudFront. Okay, so CloudFront, it's a service that AWS offers, which is called Content Distribution Network. Okay, it's called CDN, right? Okay, so what is a content distribution network, right? Just let's do a quick understanding of a CDN, right? Let's just see what is the content delivery network, right? So what is the content delivery network? Let's look at the Wikipedia article for that. A content delivery network or a content distribution network is a geographically distributed network of proxy servers and their data centers. The goal is to provide high availability and performance by distributing the service spatially relative to end users. Okay, so now let's kind of understand the certain keywords that are there in this definition of CDN. CDN is a geographically distributed network. So, which means it is spread across the whole world, geographically distributed. It is distributed in multiple different regions across the globe. Network, it's a network, okay, which means they're all connected to each other. Okay, so that's why it's called network. They're all connected to each other of proxy servers, right? Okay, a server is a server, right? So, but what is a proxy? We always use the word proxy, right, in multiple things. Even in real life, we say proxy, right? I mean, if somebody doesn't go and instead he or she asks his or her friend to go and place the attendance on his behalf, then it becomes a proxy attendance, correct? So server is the actual server, which is the actual identity, but proxy server is something that is, front-ending that server, right? So which is not the real server, but instead the proxy simply takes the information and sends it to the actual backend server. Okay, that's called the proxy server, right? Again, in the same example, if somebody is representing me in a meeting or somewhere, he will simply take the information, relay it back to me, correct? So that's basically the proxy. So it's a network of proxy servers. It's not the actual server. It's only simply relaying the content. The actual content lies in the server, which is called the origin. Okay, that's called the origin. So these are some of the terms that you need to understand, and their data centers. Okay, proxy servers and their data centers. The goal is to provide high availability and performance by distributing the service spatially relative to end users. Right? When you say spatially relative, what does it mean by spatially relative? Which means you're geographically closer, right? Because usually, if you're closer to a certain specific service, the performance of that will be much higher because the latency will be lower. Right? For example, we are in India, right? So now if we need to read some file or download some file from US, latency will be much higher because it has to cross several thousands of miles across the entire network, and it has to fetch that file from the origin server, which is in the US, right? So now in this case, the job of a CDN is to provide high availability and performance by distributing the service. So which means in this case, it could be a video that you may look at, or an image that, or a website or a static website, right? So now you're distributing that service spatially relative to the end users. So in this case, if I'm in India, I'm in Hyderabad, so I will get the video or image served from a server which is closer to me, which means the latency will be much lower and the performance of that will be much higher, okay, relative to the end user. So that's why it's very important, right? Relative to end user is something which is very important. CDNs came into existence in the late 1990s as a means for alleviating the performance bottlenecks of the internet, right? Because the bandwidth was not that very high, right? And there are a lot of content that were available on the internet. So that's where CDNs came into existence in the late 1990s, just to alleviate the performance bottlenecks of the internet, as the internet was starting to become a mission critical medium for people and enterprises. Since then, CDNs have grown to serve a large portion of the internet content today, including web objects such as the text that you see, graphics and scripts. Even this website, this Wikipedia, might come from a CDN. Okay, downloadable objects such as media files, softwares, documents, softwares. Right, software is very important. You have, say, you are downloading mm, an Eclipse, right? Or you're downloading some IDE, or you're downloading Python. So all those softwares will be distributed on different CDN servers over the internet, so that you download it from a location that is closer to you. Applications like e-commerce and portals. E-commerce, such as you take Amazon.in. Okay, Amazon.in. The moment you just open it, it just comes up, right? How does it possible? So where does it get this content from? See, hardly took a few milliseconds for me to load the entire Amazon.in, right? So now if you see, it has got so much of rich content in it, images, so much of dynamic content also, correct? So now how's it able to download all of this, right? So that's because of the CDN which is there. The live streaming media, right? YouTube, right? So when you download a YouTube video, you're possibly streaming it from a location that is closer to you, from a CDN location that is closer to you. Okay, and that's where it is downloading that media from. That's why it was able to stream it at a faster rate, and with a very low latency. And social media sites as well, right? Including Facebook, Twitter, and all that. They would also store it in a CDN location, so that the users in that particular region would actually download it from there. Okay, all right. So now let's get back to. So this is basically the definition of a CDN, right? So content delivery network, content distribution network. Now, CloudFront. CloudFront is basically a CDN service that AWS offers. It's a global, right? The moment you say CDN, it's a global service. It's not only specific to, let's say, one region, right? And similarly, you have other popular services such as Akamai, Cloudflare, right? So these are some of the popular CDN services. It's called Akamai. This one, Akamai Technologies, Cloudflare. A global network built for the cloud. So these are all some of the popular CDN services that are used commonly by applications, by global applications, global enterprises. Okay, all right. So let's go back. Now CloudFront is a CDN service, right? So now, okay, let's understand a few more things. So now this is the world map. Now AWS has got different regions, correct? across the globe. There are several regions, and availability zones, and it is one region where you store the actual content, right? So in this case, if I go back to my S3 bucket that I created the other day, where I was hosting my static website. Yeah, this one, right? RPL 2021 staticwebsite.com. Where is this bucket stored? If you see, this bucket is actually stored in Mumbai. Right? It's physically stored in Mumbai region, which means that each and every time it will be served out of Mumbai region. Okay, this website will be served out of Mumbai region. So now all of us are accessing it from within India, correct? From within India. But if I access it, say from somewhere in, um, say US region, correct? I'll show you, right? I'm going to access it a, from a physical server which is in US region. Okay, you may wonder how, but I'm going to do that and show you how it accesses the website, correct? It physically has to traverse through all this distance, correct? Because this is where the network goes, correct? So it has to, each time it has to request for a file from this S3 bucket, or it has to do a get operation. It has to travel through all this distance. Okay, so that way, I mean, there is an origin server. So origin server is this orange one, where the actual content is present. That is always called the origin server, right? Remember this terminology. Even when you work with web applications, right? When you work with load balancers, when you work with WAF, so this terminology is very important. It's called the origin server. Origin server is where the actual content is present, and that is the origin of a specific content. So now in this case, you have, excuse me, so you have the origin server present in the Mumbai region. So that is where my S3 bucket is lying. And the circles, the blue circles are the actual users, right? Users are spread across the globe. In India, right? So in Hyderabad, in say somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in London, and South America, and America, and somewhere in New Zealand as well. Okay? So these are the locations of my users. So now each time somebody has to access my website, as I said, it has to come all the way to the origin server, access the website, and go back. Correct. So that means the latency will be much higher. What is latency? Latency is the time taken to serve some content, the round trip that is taken to serve some content, not to fetch some object or to download some file or whatever it is, correct? From that particular origin server. That's called the latency. So now in case, if I'm trying to access it from within Mumbai or within India, the latency will be much lower, right? We're going to see how that latency is going to be much lower, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually access that website now. Okay, so let me just open this, the same website, whatever we created the other day. I'll just copy this link. I'll just go to my Chrome, and here before that I will basically open the developer tools. Okay, so what are developer tools? I'm sure a lot of you would be aware of it. Developer tools, when you press function F12 or just F12 when you open the browser, this will open up a pane like this below, right? So which will actually have a lot of informative troubleshooting uh, features, such as it'll have a tab called network tab. Okay, so what this network tab does is when you browse a website with this developer tools on, it will instrument the entire uh, the request response pipeline, and it's going to tell me how much time it took. So I'll just do it. Yeah. Okay. So if you see, I've just loaded the website, the developer tools which is on. Here it tells me, what is the name, what is the status. It's 200 is okay, right? I mean, HTTP status 200 is okay, right? So when you have 403, it means that content resource is not found. When you have 500, it is error, right? And it will also tell me what is the type of this content that it is serving, right? It's a document style sheet, an image PNG, script is a JavaScript, style sheet, font. It also downloads a few fonts, right? Then HTML, text as slash HTML, right? It tells me, and it also tells me what is the size of that, right? So each one provides a has a size 19 KB, 21 KB. All these images are like about 3 KB, 4 KB, right? 87 KB. If you see this JavaScript, jQuery JavaScript is very high in size, 87 KB. Okay. The CSS is even I have 37 KB. Sorry, somebody has to go on mute, please. Yeah, and if you see this, this is 55 KB, 44 KB. So I mean, so and then it also tells me how much time it took to load that particular, download that particular content, and what the browser usually does is browser stores whatever it can store within its cache. Okay, so that next time it first looks into its own internal cache before downloading it from the internet. But for the first time when it loads, it took about 200 milliseconds, 72, 128 milliseconds, etc., etc. So now, on the whole, and if you see, some of it will be done parallelly, right? If you see, it's going to do it parallelly. It's not going to do it sequentially, and it will tell you how the whole waterfall looks like, right? But from start to end, if you see the bottom, it took about 956 milliseconds, which is one less than a just about less than a second. 1000 milliseconds is 1 second, so it's just about less than a second. So it took about 956 milliseconds. So now imagine this is just one request, correct? And I'm loading this from India, right? Because my laptop is in India and I'm loading it from India, right? So okay, now let me do one thing. Let me actually uh, load it from a server which is in the US, right? So let me just provision a EC2 instance which is in US. So I'm going to provision an EC2 instance which is in the west coast of the US, Oregon. Okay, so let me share the screen back. Yeah, so I'm in my account. I'll just open EC2. I will change the region to mm, Oregon, right? Oregon is in west. So if you see this, I'll just zoom out. Yeah, for the zoom out. Yeah, see, Oregon is somewhere here. Yeah, this is Oregon. Right? If you see, it's in the west coast of the US. Okay. So the west coast, we have two regions in the west coast, right? So one is in Oregon, so other one is in the uh, North California or South California. Yeah, North California, right? So the other one is in the North California. So, and there are two in the east. Okay, US East, North Virginia, US East, Ohio. But now what we are going to do is we're actually going to provision something in Oregon region. Okay, so let's do that. I've changed myself to Oregon. Uh, Let me check if I've got a key here. I think it is there. So let's just go ahead. It's there. Okay, good. So let me just search for Windows and let me select a Windows 2019. Okay, I'm going to provision a slightly higher specs machine. You don't have to do this. Just keep it text large. Yeah, I will just provision it in a default VPC, which is and a default public subnet because I need instant access. Add name as rest to security group. Do I have a default security group? No, I don't want to use this. I will use this one. I'll create a new one. RDP public. Public. Yeah, 3389. Review and launch. I'll use this key, acknowledge and launch instance. Okay, so now what I want to prove is when I created when I was trying to access this, you can also do this, right? So from your own respective laptops, you can use the same URL that I gave you on Saturday. I'm just going to paste it in the chat. Okay, so access this by keeping the developer tools open, right? So if you have to open the developer tools, press F12 or function F12 or whatever works in your laptop, but it's usually the F12 key. Okay, open that and go to the network tab and then access this website. So then you will see the load time here in the bottom. Load is 956 milliseconds. Okay, that's probably the first time because it has to load all this. Now, if I go ahead and refresh this, it will reduce to about 165 milliseconds because it actually got a lot of this from the memory cache. If you see, all these are coming from the memory cache. The PNG, it's all coming from the disk cache. So wherever you see 0 milliseconds, everything is coming from the cache. Okay, so it took about 165 milliseconds. Okay, if I keep doing it, it will be around that range, 170, between 100 to 200 milliseconds, because it is fetching it from the cache, which is the local cache, right? So, but again, local cache, you cannot rely on the local cache every time, right? So, because it's not reliable, because certain browsers may prevent storing the local cache, right? And it may not allow you to do a local cache, right? So now, um, after some time, if I again load it, the local cache would have expired. Okay, or I can also go ahead and uh, clear all the cache, my local cache. Okay, I can also do that. Okay, so when I do that, then the whole cache would go away, and then I'll have to again reload the whole thing. You can also do a disable cache and then load it every time. So if you see, I've disabled the cache. It's not loading it from the cache. It's actually fetching it from the network every time. So it takes about 826 milliseconds. Okay. Okay. All right. So now let's just go back and see if the EC2 instance is ready. Yeah, it's running. Okay. So let me just go and connect the connect and take a password of this. How do I take the password? I have to use the key. RTL Oregon Lab is the key that I'm using. Just open. Okay, key is fine. So just decrypt the password, but before that, let me just grab the EC2 instance. This one. So connect. Password. Okay, the password is decrypted. So let me just open the remote desktop. Okay, I'm just using the default username, which is administrator, and the password is this password. I've just copied this password. Just say done. Yeah, so I've just connected to an EC2 instance, which is in the US West 2, which is Oregon. So right now I'm in Oregon. I'm going to browse this website in the Oregon region. Before that, let me just do a bit of changes. Just doing some of these things. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually install Chrome here. Okay, let me install Chrome. Install Chrome. I'll use the same browser. Got Chrome is installed. I'll just keep making use of Chrome. Okay. Google.com. If it's working. Yeah, it's working. Perfect. So now let me come back and let me again grab the same URL, copy this link. I go to my Windows instance, which is running in Oregon. Right. So I'm trying to access it from here. From here. So now what it does is it actually would make a request every time to this. Yeah, so if you see this, I'll just color it a little differently. Yeah, so if you see this, uh, I'm a user who's in Oregon. Physically, I'm there, right? Or virtually, I'm there. The server is physically running in Oregon. Okay, the new Windows machine that I provisioned, it is running in Oregon. From there, I'm trying to access the website which is running in Mumbai, which is hosted on S3. Right? Let's see how much is the. So here, from here to here, the time it took was about some 900 milliseconds, 800 milliseconds, correct? So now let us see the time it takes from Oregon to Mumbai. Okay, but before that, let me just press one function F12. Okay, and to actually put it below. I don't want the put it below. Yeah, I'll just go to the network. And I'll say disable cache. Okay, and I'll say yeah, I'm going to hit the website. Wow, how much time it took? See this? 2.24 seconds, almost more than twice, right? So 2.5 times. It took about 2.5 times as compared to when I was trying to access this website from Hyderabad to Mumbai. It took about 900 milliseconds or 800 milliseconds. Okay, but when I'm trying to access that from somewhere in the US, from Oregon, okay, from a computer which is from a server which is in Oregon for a client which is in Oregon, it's taking about 2.24 seconds. Okay, I can again try this out because I've disabled the cache. See how slow it is, right? You see, when you're able to feel that, right? If I click refresh, See how slow it is loading it. Okay. If I come back and access the same website from Hyderabad, again, once again, with the disabled cache, it's a little better. I wouldn't say it is great because it's still taking 700 milliseconds. It is still taking 700 milliseconds, whereas from Oregon, it took about 2.5 seconds or 2.7 seconds, which is almost 2.5, 3 times greater than when I try to access it from a server which is closer to my location. Okay, so now I'm a user who is in Hyderabad, whereas the origin is in Mumbai, little closer, right? Probably how many 600, 700, 800 kilometers, whereas the distance between Mumbai and Oregon is large, very large. I don't know. Let me just see what is the distance between Mumbai to the distance. How much is it? Okay, no, it's not with that. Flight's not available. Okay, just say walking. Okay, there's no walking distance, no cycling. Okay, I don't know how to calculate. Maybe there are some websites that tell you what is the distance between Oregon. 8,000 miles. Okay, it's 8,000 miles actually. Okay, whereas distance between Hyderabad and Mumbai is 700 kilometers. Okay, that's the difference. Okay, so now if you see, it's taking about 2.5 times, correct? So now this is where CDN becomes helpful. Okay, what CDN does is, CDN is basically a content distribution or a content delivery network, right? So where it's a global service. Either you take AWS CloudFront or you take Akamai or you take Cloudflare, or what these CDN services offer is they offer you something called edge locations. So what these edge locations do is when you want to cache certain content, right? In this case, I have a website that I have hosted on S3. I want to cache my entire website. What is caching? What is cache? I'm not talking about CASH, talking about CACHE. What is cache? Can somebody answer? What is the meaning of cache in the
Mostly things will be stored in cache memory.
things will be stored in cache memory. Okay, all right, great. So where all do you find cache?
So when we have access any site, then store in cache memory as small files. This is called caches.
Okay, okay, great. In fact, how many of you have learned microprocessors in your academics? If you have
I
learned
have learned.
microprocessors, yeah. So if you have learned
Yes.
microprocessors, then in microprocessor there is a cache within the microprocessor CPU. Okay, the CPU actually caches, and there's a size that CPU has got, right? So in plain terms, cache is a fast. It's a memory, where data is stored temporarily, so that it can be retrieved in a very fast fashion. It can be retrieved quickly. Okay, because usually if you take disk, or if every time it has to go to an origin, read from the disk and get it back, then the round trip will add to the overall latency, right? Otherwise, if you store something in a cache, which is very nearby, right, which is very close by, you can simply fetch that data from the cache and serve the data. So now usually what kind of data is stored in a cache? The data that doesn't change very frequently. Okay, that you only have to decide as application developer, as a systems engineer, you have to decide what type of data can be stored in a cache so that it does not have to read it from the database each and every time and fetch it from the cache and store it and return it back to the end user. Like, let me give a few examples, right? Addresses. You take addresses, addresses are not going to change, correct? The pin codes are not going to change. The city names, the country names, so these are all not going to change. So now these are some of the ideal candidates to be stored in a cache, right? So that it does not change. The pin code is not going to change, correct? It's not going to change frequently, or it's not going to change at all. Similarly, addresses are not going to really change, right? And if you take an address, the address is not going to change that frequently, right? Like let's take a banking, e-banking site, right? Online banking. So if you log into an online banking website, it'll actually load the demographics of the end user, right? Such as the address and the number of accounts they have, right? So for example, I may have two savings account, two loan accounts, and so on and so forth, right? So first time it loads it and it actually stores it in a cache. So next time when I navigate back to that screen, it will load it from the cache. So that is not fetched from the database each and every time. Whereas what is fetched from the database is the actual balance that you have, because that can change. That is a very volatile data, right? If somebody is doing some transfer to you, you cannot store that in a cache, because when you store that in the cache, then it becomes stale. You're showing a wrong information to the end user. If I'm expecting 1 lakh rupees from somebody, and if I don't see that reflect that 1 lakh rupees on my browser, then I will think that the money is still not there, right? So I cannot store that in a cache. And so these are some of the examples of the cache. But usually in websites, when you build websites and when you host websites on either EC2 or on S3 or wherever it is, you front end it with a CDN. What the CDN does is it actually stores some of these assets, website assets on the cache. What are those assets? I was just showing you some time back, right? The JavaScript files, the CSS files, the images, the icons, the PNG files, and so on and so forth. They're not going to change frequently, because only when you make some changes to your website and redeploy your website, only then those would change. Otherwise, they're not going to change frequently, right? So now what a CDN does is, in this case, let's take CloudFront as the CDN. Now, all of us are aware that AWS has got global infrastructure, right? It has got infrastructure almost in every part of every continent, right? And so that the users in that continent will be able to make use of the services. And similarly, what AWS has got is, along with the main data centers that AWS have got, such as the regions, we also have something called edge locations. Okay, there's something called edge locations. So what these edge locations do is they act as a simple cache. Okay, they only store temporary data, right, for a period of time that you specify. They store it in the cache, and whenever you hit a website, it first looks for the cache edge location which is nearby, closer to the end user. That internet is aware of that, right? Now, for example, I'm in Hyderabad. I know from where I'm originating from, where my work request is originating from, correct? Through a DNS service, right? So because my DNS would be in Hyderabad, my DNS servers would be in Hyderabad, right? So from that perspective, my ISP is also offering me a connection in Hyderabad only. So that way, what the CDN does is, CDN actually fetches the content that is closer to my location. In this case, I'm in Hyderabad. So somewhere in Hyderabad, there will be a CDN location. There will be an edge location that AWS manages, where the content is hosted, and it will simply fetch that content from Hyderabad itself. It need not go to Mumbai. It need not go travel 800 kilometers to Mumbai to fetch that information. Rather, it will simply fetch it from less than say 40-50 kilometers. Okay. In Hyderabad, I know in high-tech city, there is the edge location. There is POP edge location that AWS has. Okay. High-tech city from my house is about less than 20 kilometers. Okay. So it will simply fetch that content from a POP location. It's called a POP location, edge location from high-tech city. And then it will serve that content. Instead of traveling 800 kilometers, it will just travel only 20 kilometers, fetch that content and render it on my browser. Similarly, I have a scenario where there is a user who is trying to access it from the Oregon region in the US, right? So now again, in the US, you have got edge locations all over the US, it will fetch the content from a pop location or a edge location, which is closer to Oregon, and then it will fetch it from there, right? So that is where, when you first create a CDN, when you first create a distribution, a CloudFront distribution, it will take about 5 minutes. And then what it does is it actually distributes the content which is your JavaScript files, images, CSS, fonts, logos, and everything, all those static content, it actually distributes in all these locations for your distribution, for your website. It will simply take it and distribute it in all the locations. So now, when a user is trying to access through that CloudFront URL, so then you will only start accessing it from the CloudFront URL, because that is front-ending your website. So then when you access it from through the CloudFront URL, it knows from which location you're trying to access. Instead of fetching the content from the bucket which is in the Mumbai region, it will fetch it from the location that is closer to you. Right? I mean, we saw that, right? When I tried to access the website from Hyderabad, it took about 800 milliseconds. Whereas when I tried to access the same website from Oregon, because of the distance, it took about 2.5 seconds. So it is clear that the time that it takes to load a website, or the time that it takes to fetch the content, is directly proportional to the distance, right? So we all agree to that, right? I've also proved that it is directly proportional to the distance from the between the user and the origin. Now you won't be able to solve that problem, right? So because you will have users all across the globe, so you won't be able to solve that distance problem. But what you can solve is, you will be able to solve that in an indirect fashion by serving the content in a shorter distance as a copy, as a cache. Okay, so that each time the user need not hit the origin server and fetch the content, which will be a costly operation. Okay, so that is where the CloudFront plays a very, very important role, and it actually helps in cutting short that entire duration. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see how to create a CloudFront distribution. Okay, but
Meanwhile,
before
Professor,
that,
a generic question.
yeah,
That cloud, that edge location finalization, in the sense on which location the user is tapping that resource from. Originally, the content might actually stay, the website is actually a US-based website. I'm tapping from Hyderabad. Which edge location it need to define? Is that automatically dynamically done by CDN, or can a user choose that, or a client choose that?
no, it is automatically defined by the CDN. So because again, when we look at CDN, it is based on the DNS also, right? So because in this case, as an end user, say for example, a user is trying to access it from Hyderabad, whereas the origin server is in the US, right? So now from Hyderabad, when the request originates from Hyderabad, the request has to actually originate to the CDN URL. So CDN will create a unique URL for your content, which will front end your S3 or your website, which is hosted in US. So now when the user hits that URL, the CDN has that intelligence to know where that user is originating from.
Okay, yeah, that was the question. Yeah.
Okay, because it comes from certain ISP, it has certain IP address range, correct? Because each region, if you take the whole world, the network on the whole world, each region has got certain IP addresses allocated to it. Okay, for example, Hyderabad will have a range of IP addresses. Similarly, Chennai will have a range of IP addresses. Similarly, you take any other town or city, it will have its own range of IP addresses, right? So through that mapping, the CDN is intelligent enough to know where the request is originating from, and it will automatically choose the closest CDN edge cache location, which is closer to that. Okay, so that is where it's basically, it uses some algorithm there, right? The traveling salesman algorithm. I'm just giving an example, which will find the shortest path to reach between a source and the destination.
Yeah, and one last question is this edge locations physical locations or virtual locations?
They're all physical locations.
Oh, physical location. Okay.
They're all physical locations. Yes. I'll just show a list of those locations. Yeah, thanks for asking these questions, Melissa. If you see, I'm sure all these questions are very valid questions in the lingering in the minds of our students. Okay, so if I just go to the global infrastructure, okay, so there are total 26 regions, 84 availability zones, okay, 14 local zones, ignore these, yeah, and 310 plus points of presence. This points of presence is nothing but edge locations. So if you see, there are about 300 plus edge locations, which means they are physical locations. Okay. If you take Hyderabad, as I said, in Hyderabad, there is edge location in high tech city, somewhere near high tech city. Okay. So if you see this, these are the, so these the blue ones are the regions. I'm just trying to get the list of edge locations. Location search. Let me see if I get it. Okay, and also what AWS does is it announces a lot of releases every month or every week. So now this is one such announcement that AWS has made, where May 13, 2020, it announced Amazon CloudFront announces its first edge locations in Kolkata, India, and Hamburg, Germany. Viewers served by these new edge locations can expect to see up to 20% improvement in latency. In India, CloudFront has multiple edge locations in Bengaluru, Chennai, Delhi, Hyderabad, and Mumbai. Okay, so these are the cities where there are already edge locations. So now to that, they also added Kolkata as the edge location, which is a physical location. This is not virtual locations, physical. Yeah. Okay. So here I got it. This is what I was looking at. Okay. So if you see, this blue ones are the edge locations, and this purple one is like multiple edge locations. Okay. So let me just zoom in. If you see in India, Delhi, Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, and Mumbai. Now Kolkata is also added to this. Right. So all these are edge locations. So now, based on where the user is, and if I go to US, in US, you see all over the US there are edge locations. So now, if my origin is in Mumbai, right? So if my origin is in Mumbai, my S3 bucket is in Mumbai, and when I create a CDN distribution for my website, it is actually going to get replicated in all the 300 edge locations across the world. That is how powerful it is. The content will be distributed to all the 300 locations, and there will be a unique URL which will be given. Now, if I hit that unique URL from anywhere in the world, it will fetch the content which is closer to my physical location from where the user is trying to access that content from. Okay, so that is how it works. Okay, all right. Any other questions? I'm just going to disable and delete some old ones so that there won't be confusion. Disabling it. Okay, let's just leave it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new distribution. So now if I go to CloudFront, CloudFront again has got a console. So if I go here, I'll be able to see multiple things, but these are some of the advanced features. Let's first look at the very basic bare minimum. So here you get a orange button as usual to create a new distribution. So here, what you can do is, in order to create a CloudFront distribution for your S3, there are a set of steps that we need to make. We need to follow. Okay. Yeah. So from the static website hosting box, copy the endpoint of your bucket without the leading http://. So this will be our bucket name, correct? Bucket name with .amazonaws.com. Okay. So I'm going to do that. So let me just go back. Let me first go to S3. Let me open this, go to the properties, and I will copy this thing, right? I will copy till here. HTTP is not required. I'll just copy it and keep it in my memory clipboard. So if I just go to this thing, I'll say create distribution. Okay, so then what it says, add a bucket policy that allows public read to the bucket that you created. For this configuration, the S3's bucket policy must be disabled. Block public access settings must be, if your use case requires to block the block public access to be enabled, use the REST API or OAI. Okay, there's something called origin access identity within S3. So where you can actually, if you front end it with a CloudFront, correct? So now let me just go ahead and do a bit of whiteboarding here. So now what I'm trying to do is I have my S3 bucket. Okay, so this is my S3 bucket, which is in the Mumbai region, on which I have posted my website. Okay, this is where my website is hosted. Go back. This is my website, which is hosted. This is the website which is hosted on the S3 bucket, correct? It has got some objects. It has got index.html. And it's in Mumbai region. So now when users access it, they directly hit it, right? So when I say this is the user, and let's assume this user is in okay, so this user is accessing it from Hyderabad. This guy is accessing it from Hyderabad, and there's also another user who's trying to access it from Oregon. Because those are the two locations that I can show you, right? Oregon. Okay, so there are two users who are trying to access it from two different regions. This guy is from Hyderabad, this guy is from accessing it from US. Okay, so now when both these users access it, what they do is they access it directly to this particular endpoint, right? We directly access it to this endpoint. So each time it will fetch it from Mumbai and return it back, right? So now when you create a CloudFront CDN, again, the CloudFront CDN, it's a global service. It's not specific to a region. Let me extend this slightly. So what the CloudFront does is, CloudFront will create a distribution. Okay, so this CloudFront distribution, what it does is, it actually front ends all your requests. So your request will be made to the CloudFront instead of your S3 bucket directly, and in turn, the CloudFront distribution will talk to your S3 bucket. Okay, this is how it happens, and this CloudFront distribution will be a global distribution, which will serve the content from a closest edge location across all those 300 edge locations in the world. Okay, and now the first time when you created this CloudFront distribution, what it will do is it will take the content from this website and it will distribute the content across those 300 edge locations across the globe. And then onwards, you only access the CloudFront URL instead of accessing the S3 URL directly, right? So now here, what you can do is you can actually disable the S3 URL where you can restrict the S3 URL because you should not allow the users to hit the S3 directly, right? So then the whole purpose is defeated if you allow the users to hit the S3. So that's where you'll have to prevent the users from accessing the S3 directly, and it's only the CloudFront that the users will access. The CloudFront will in turn access S3 and fetch the content on need basis, right? That's called origin access identity, where you can specify a bucket policy which says only the CloudFront distribution will be able to access the S3 and users will be able to access the CloudFront. Publicly, anyone will be able to access the CloudFront, but only CloudFront will be able to access the S3. Okay. Anyways, that's a slightly advanced topic. I don't want to confuse you, but that's one thing which is possible. You can do that. Okay. So in this case, what I want to do is I just want to go ahead and so this step we can ignore, add a bucket policy. That's okay. That's fine. Create a CloudFront distribution. Origin domain. So now for the origin domain, you just have to paste that URL, right? So what is that URL that I copied? This one without the http:// right? I'm just going to remove this. Just going to okay. Okay, and when you create a CloudFront, you can also use a HTTPS, right? So because right now, if you see my static website does not have any SSL certificate used, right? It is just using plain HTTP, which means that it is not encrypted. So I can actually use a HTTPS also if you want. Okay, and then what I can do is I'll just go back. I'll just leave all this optional. So this is the name. If I want to add any custom header, I can add, but that's okay. So then come back, go to click on additional settings, just leave everything as it is. Okay, here you can use your policy as both HTTP and HTTPS, which means that you can use it. You can use both HTTP and HTTPS, your protocol policy. Just leave it as it is. Yeah. Cache key and origin request. So it's basically we're using the default cache policy. Okay, which cache policy here? We're using a cache optimized cache policy where CloudFront compression algorithm will get enabled, right? It will compress the requests using some sort of an algorithm. There are so many settings. Okay, so now here, if you come down to the price class, use all edge locations. Okay, which means in this case, it is going to use all the 300 edge locations for my CloudFront distribution, where it's going to distribute this content across all the 300 edge locations in the world. If you use only North America and Europe, it will only restrict the distribution to only North America and Europe. Okay, it will not go to South America, it will not go to Asia Pacific, Japan, China, and all those locations, right? You can use North America, Europe, Asia, Middle East, and Africa, right? So which means that you're only going to store in these continents. Okay, so now this is not to don't get confused with this on the question that Murli sir had asked, right? What Murli sir was trying to understand was he was trying to understand the location from where the cache content should be served. Is that a dynamic decision or is that something that you have to feed in, right? No, that is a dynamic decision. That intelligence is there. But here, what we are trying to do is we are trying to say that store the cache only in these edge locations instead of storing it in all the 300 edge locations for a specific reason. What is that reason? It's price. And if you don't want to incur additional cost, you can only store it in the North America and Europe. If you know that your users are only in North America and Europe, if your users are spread across the world, then you have to go for all the edge locations, which is the best performance. Okay, and you can use a custom SSL certificate and all of that. Okay, and the default root object. So the moment I say create distribution, it's actually going to start the creation of the distribution. So now this is what we have done. Okay, so this is what we have done. So we have just gone ahead and created a new distribution, and I've just given some steps there. Okay, so now here you can also give a default root object. Okay, so now here that you have the default root object is index.html, so that when I hit the distribution, it will search for this index.html. It will serve the index.html directly. I don't have to, suffix the index.html at the end of my URL. Okay, so give that and then just say create the distribution. Yeah, so it is creating the distribution. It will take about 5 minutes for the distribution to be created. So let me delete the older one. Yeah, so if you see this, it is currently deploying this. So now while it deploys, let us review some of the other stuff, right? So now it has a unique ID, and it also has an ARN. It says deploying. Okay. So now let's come down and see. There is a domain name that comes along with the distribution, which is a unique domain name for my distribution, which has this random characters, right? D3MW66, so on and so forth, .cloudfront.net. Okay, that's a random domain name that I have that the CloudFront provides. So now you can mask this random name with your domain name also, right? If you have your own domain name, such as example.com or whatever, right? Yeah, so if you may buy a domain name from GoDaddy or AWS or any other domain providers, and you can simply replace this with your domain name, so that then the request will simply get redirected to this particular distribution domain name. Okay, and if you see, the origin is my static website, which is the RPL 2021 static website.com.s3 website, AP South1, etc., etc. Okay, that's my origin. And then behaviors, I'm just using the standard default behavior, which allows HTTP and HTTPS and so on and so forth. Then are there any specific geographic restrictions that I have? You can actually edit this and say that you only allow certain countries, or you block certain countries also, right? You can block certain countries out here from this list. Okay, you can just do that also, but I don't want to do any of that. Just leave it. Then you can invalidate the content within that cache, right? So for example, you have done a new deployment to your website. You have changed some HTML pages. You have added new images, right? So now usually what happens is there is a concept called TTL, time to live. So every object within the CDN or the cache has a TTL flag associated with it, right? So that TTL is usually higher. So now when you make a new deployment, you have to tell the cache that I've made a new deployment, and now you go ahead and update your cache with the new version of my image or my HTML, right? In this case, you go create a new invalidation, and you say that you can either do a star, or you can do a specific. If I want to only change the index.html, I can just say /index.html, create invalidation. What it's going to do is it's going to pick the new index.html file from my origin, and it's going to redistribute that index.html to all the 300 edge locations across the world. So the latest version of that file is available. Okay, but by default there is a default TTL that CDN has. Okay, you can read it from the documentation. I don't remember it on top of my mind. So now based on that, every day or every once in 2 hours or 3 hours, it will refresh the content of the cache, because it has to, its aim is to always have it up to date, correct? It doesn't want a stale content to be served through the cache. Okay, but usually what happens is when you host websites, Only the dynamic content is going to change. The static content is not going to change that frequently. Okay, so let's go back and see if the distribution is created. Yes, the distribution is created now. If you see, it's enabled, last modified December 20, 4 a.m. in UTC. So now what I can do is I can just grab this URL. I'll go back to my browser to this thing, and I will just use the okay. So now instead of using my S3 URL, I'm going to use my CloudFront URL because of this one. Right? I'm not going to use the S3 URL directly. Instead, I'm going to use the CloudFront distribution to access my website. If you just go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so now let me just remove this disable cache. Let me just refresh this. Now, if you see here, it's actually loading it in 112 milliseconds. Okay, now this is from Hyderabad itself. Okay, if I hit the S3 directly, I will also do this disable cache. And let me refresh this, load it once. Okay. So now if you see this, I'm actually loading it multiple times. So now when I hit the S3 URL, it takes 97 milliseconds. When I hit the CloudFront URL, it takes about 85 milliseconds, 67 milliseconds, 90 milliseconds. It's almost around that range, right? Because there's not much of a difference, between, when I'm trying to access it from, say, Mumbai or Hyderabad. Okay. So now you will see the major difference when I go to Oregon, right? So in this case, I'm in Oregon. I'll just remove this disable caching. Let me reload this once again. So it took about, say, 566 milliseconds. So now let me go ahead and use my CloudFront URL for my okay, I'm just going to use my CloudFront URL. Yeah, so see, my CloudFront URL is serving it in less than 200 milliseconds. Whereas without CloudFront, it took about 566 milliseconds. Okay, in fact, if I go ahead and disable the cache, this number will increase even further, right? Because it's not going to take it from my local cache. Every time it's going to fetch it from the source, it took about 1.84 seconds. If I go back to my CloudFront, okay, and then say disable cache here, that's okay. It's going to load it from the server every time, but not from the origin server, but it's from the cache server. Okay, so this is the first time it loads. Yeah, but second time, if I hit, it took about 225 milliseconds. If you see this, it took about 225 milliseconds, 159 milliseconds. Right, look at the difference between these two. Right, let me just go ahead and disable cache on both. This disable cache is the local cache, okay, the browser cache. Don't get confused with the edge cache. 560 milliseconds. Here it is, 73 milliseconds. I'll again refresh my S3. It is 300 milliseconds. I'll come and refresh my CloudFront. It is 85 milliseconds. See, almost 4 times. So basically, what CloudFront claims is it gives you about 20% benefit in terms of the response time. But in fact, if you see, it's more than 20%, right? It's like probably 4 times, which is like 400% benefit that you're getting. See, 81 milliseconds. Whereas here, if you see, if I hit the S3 URL directly, it takes about 533 milliseconds. 83 milliseconds. 300 milliseconds. 81 milliseconds. There's a clear difference. There's a very clear difference. 276 milliseconds. Here it is 75 milliseconds. Right. So that's where the benefit of CloudFront comes in. Just do it here. 149 milliseconds. 253 milliseconds. See, here also you see a difference, right? So this, I'm directly loading it from Mumbai, RPL 2021, which is the S3 URL, which serves it from Mumbai directly. But if I hit the same using the CloudFront, it is 149 milliseconds because it is actually fetching it from some edge location, which is in Hyderabad. It doesn't go to Mumbai. It doesn't travel 700 kilometers. It only travels 20-25 kilometers. Okay, you see, that's why it's 149 milliseconds, whereas here it takes about 253 milliseconds, about 100 milliseconds of latency, okay, between Mumbai and Hyderabad. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just show you a small example of how to do the cache invalidation, right? So now let me just go to my S3. Just go to the content that I have. This is the wave file that I have, index.html. Let me just edit this. Okay, let me just edit this. Let's assume I'm making some changes to my index.html. Okay. What should I change? Just give me a second. This one, right? What is this? Whatever is this? Whichever language. This is. Oops, what is that? Yeah, okay. So it's here, right? Heading. Yeah, now this. Yeah, so this is the heading. Right. So I'm just going to change this heading to just going to change it. We'll save this. I've saved it. Let me see if it opens it properly. Yeah, okay. So this I've changed. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just go to my S3 bucket and let me upload this new file into the S3 bucket into my website. Instead of this index.html, I'm going to upload the new one. Add files. Yeah, so this is changed at what time? Modified today at 9:46. Yeah, this is the right file. I'll just open it. Let me just go ahead and upload this. Yeah, so it's uploaded. All right. So now if I refresh my S3 directly, it's going to load it. It will say, hello RPL champs, right? Welcome to CloudFront. But if I refresh my CDN URL, it is still going to show the old one. Right? If you see, the title header has not changed. So it is still going to show the old one because it is loading it from the cache. It is present in those 300 edge locations. What is present? The old index.html is present. So now this is where what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here, go to invalidations. I will create an invalidation. I will say /index.html, or I can do a star. Let me just do a star and create. I'll just say /star. I'll just create invalidation. So everything that is there, it will again fetch all the files from my S3 bucket, and it's going to redistribute that entire content into my 300 edge locations. So once this invalidation is done, so it's called cache invalidation. If I go to invalidation, it will tell me the status. Okay, it's completed. Yeah, if you see, it's completed. It's redistributed the whole thing to 300 edge locations. So now let me go back And let me refresh this. Yeah, see, now my CloudFront URL also has the hello RPL champs, welcome to CloudFront CDN lab. Okay, if I go to my US Oregon, and if I just refresh it from the US Oregon, yeah, see, it's hello RPL champs, welcome to CloudFront CDN lab. Yeah, and it took about, first time it took about 700 milliseconds because that is the first time. But next time onwards, it takes about 99 milliseconds, right? This is the S3 URL directly. Okay, so now that's how powerful CDN works, right? And you take any, popular internet websites such as Amazon.com. Right? If you just open Amazon.com, yeah, look at this blazing fast. How is it able to load all of this within a blink of an eye? Right, and this is not only for this, right? I mean, I'm just using it in browser. If I open even my mobile app, it actually behind the scenes it must be using some CDN, right? So now let me just see what CDN Amazon.com uses. Let me just refresh this. Actually, Amazon has got its own series. Okay. Similarly, you take any other popular website, right? You can always go ahead and look for this. From where is it actually serving the content from, right? You will know, and usually there will be a CDN which will be behind the scenes, which is making. So the idea behind a CDN is to improve the user experience, end user experience, right? I mean, in this case, how my end user experience can be improved only if I load my page at a blazing fast speed, correct? Whereas if I load it slowly, if it takes, assume, 10 seconds to load this Amazon.com, imagine, how the user experience would look like, right? Similarly, if I just go to Amazon.in, look at this, how fast the page loads, right? So that's the user experience that we need to give to the end users, right? So now the whole idea is to improve the user experience and at the same time ensure that you're able to uh, keep the consistency at a higher levels, right? So if the source changes, how quickly are you able to change the cache as well, and what sort of content you can store it in the cache. Usually the dynamic content is not stored in the cache. Okay, it's only the static assets like your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and images. So these are the ones which are actually stored. Even here, if you see, there are so many images that you see, right? All this is stored in the cache. Okay, not only that, even when you go to YouTube, use YouTube, the video that you may load, right, from that you will stream, right? If I just open a video and if I stream that video, so then that video is actually loaded from a cache location which is closer to uh, my physical location. That's how that you can search. Right? So YouTube's locations. See this network edge locations. This is Google's. Yeah, but somewhere you'll find edge locations of YouTube. Okay, so any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to give. We are ready to give you the lab and you can do the lab for today. Is this interesting? The whole CloudFront CDN as a concept. I've just given the assignment for today. Just pasted it in the chat window. So you can just go and do this assignment for today, right? Use the same static website that you created on Saturday, right? So that it becomes a logical continuation. Okay. So create the distribution, don't change anything, right? Except the ones that I asked you to change. Just keep everything as it is. And okay, by the way, CloudFront, nobody asked this question, right? Whether CloudFront comes in free tier or not. Or you've already found the answer for that. Does it come or not? Yes, it does come. Right? So there is a free tier for CloudFront also. That's the reason I'm asking you to do this lab. So there is a 1 TB of data transfer out that comes under free tier. Okay, with 170 HTTP or HTTP requests, which is 1 million. I don't know. Yeah, so it's 1 million, I believe, or 10 million. Okay, and about 200 or 2 million CloudFront functioning locations, right? So there's enough given to you as part of the free tier. So you can try free tier for cloud for content delivery, which is CloudFront. Okay, and you can use it for anything, right? And not only for S3 website hosting. You can create a origin or distribution for your website which is running on EC2. You just need to front end it and then get going. That's it. And the rest of the magic will be taken care by CloudFront. Okay, all right. So it looks like there are no questions. So I hope this was quite useful and interesting, right? I mean, you can see the scale of AWS, practically, through this lab exercise, correct? And you can basically appreciate. I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate, the power of CloudFront and how CloudFront is used. And tomorrow, when you actually build websites for your customers, you can, use CloudFront. Was there a question? Nasapa? Okay, all right. So I'll just leave you here. Please get into your breakout rooms and do the lab for today, right? And tomorrow we are actually going to start a new topic. Okay, and yeah, so have a great day. I'll see you all tomorrow. I'm sure this is a pretty simple, straightforward lab activity. I'm sure you'll be able to complete it. Okay, with the help of your mentors. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day. Thanks, Sai Krishna, Sairam mentors. Thank you.
Sai Ramana, thank you.